Hey guys, welcome back. So today brought home this Valsi generator. It is 7,500 continuous watts and powered by a 13 horse Tecumseh engine. Now, I've never worked on one like this before, like this form factor with the stator on the bottom and the engine on the top. But in theory, that's a good setup. It keeps all the heat up and away from the stator. And this engine is a pretty typical tractor setup. You know, you get the fuel pump, pressurized oil, and there's no recoil, electric start only. And that could be an issue because the battery that came with it is at 0.43 volts. So I'm probably not gonna try to salvage this one. I do have another one that should fit, but before doing that, I wanna deal with this. This tire is pneumatic, has a tube, but it won't take air. And I do have some extra tires, but the diameter is too small, but the hubs look to be the same size. So this here is a tubeless. It actually is one of those ones that doesn't take air. So I'm hoping that I can just split the hub, swap the actual tires out, and then slap it all together. So if that works, I'll do the same on the other side so we have a matched pair, and then move on to the rest of this thing. Yeah, it's filled with styrofoam. Not a very smooth ride, but better than a flat tire. Okay, good enough. I'm gonna do the same on the other side. Much better. So before dealing with the battery, I want to deal with the tank. Now originally I thought this was plastic, but I was wrong. We got a metal tank. Thankfully though, there's no rust. So that fuel's old, has to be pulled out. And I think what I'm gonna do is just remove the tank, get it drained. And while I'm at it, you know, these lines are all petrified. I'm just gonna replace all the lines and put a new fuel filter on. So I got it up off the ground a bit. There is a fuel shutoff here, but it moves, but I don't want to force it. It's pretty jammed up. Anyway, thankfully it's stuck in the on position. So I'm just gonna drain it like that, leave good enough alone, and just add, an inline shutoff, something like that, once we're empty. Okay, so while that's draining out, I'm gonna get these lines off. And since this has a fuel pump, I'm gonna forgo the red filter that was on there. That's more for gravity fed systems. I'm gonna use a paper one, which will work just fine with a fuel pump. It is finally empty, and I did manage to free up the fuel valve. It turns quite a bit more, but it still doesn't stop the fuel flow completely, so I'll stick with the inline filter that I was talking about, the inline valve, and replace this line with something a little bit less petrified. So as luck would have it, I actually ordered this battery for that rigid that was suffering from vapor lock, but that one recovered and I didn't need it. So it seems to fit quite well. And it's actually a better amp hour rating than the battery that came out of there. So I think we'll be okay. The biggest issue is positives over here and negatives over here, but these leads are long enough to do that. Now, the grounding wire isn't in very good shape. I'd say half of the copper is broken off. So that's gonna need to be replaced. I don't have one of these terminals, so I'm gonna test with it like this, but it does need to be replaced. And this one probably should be too. It's pretty crusty. But for testing, I'm gonna run with it as is. And assuming this thing runs and makes power, then I'll track down some better terminals. Okay, well, you missed it. I hit the wrong button, but you didn't miss much. All I did was secure the wires, And this strap here actually is missing a piece. So I've got it loosely attached. And yeah, this wire is in pretty bad shape, but it now cranks. Let me show you. So, I think we're ready to give this thing a try. But first, gotta check the oil and add some fresh gas. Yeah, not bad. Touch over full, but it's pretty close. Almost forgot the fuel shutoff. Okay, I'm just gonna crank it, see that the pump is working. The switch is set to stop. So theoretically there'll be no spark, hopefully not, because I'd like to start it outside. Nice, that's a strong pump. Good, so I guess it's time to find out. Does the carb work and does it make power? A feather? Is there a bird nest in there? That would be a first. I'm just gonna pull this cover off. I wanna make sure there's no critters in here. It's a little weird that there was a feather kinda where it was. Well, somebody was definitely living in here. It's not too bad though. The main fins are clear. It's really just up on the front here. Not too bad actually. Okay, so let's give this thing a try. Okay, well, not too bad. Started right up, and the engine sounds good. You know, I was a bit concerned at first. There was a lot of smoke. Thought maybe there was an exhaust leak, but I don't think that's the case. I think it's just burning oil off of that pipe. And the airflow from the engine is coming right here down. So it kind of looked like it was coming out of the pipe, but I think it was just being blown by the fan on the engine. Anyway, the engine was a bit slow. You know, it was right at 60 hertz under no load. And that, you know, is a bit slow because as soon as you load it up, it's gonna just start dropping. And this is a 7,500 watt generator. I put, what, 3,000 watts on it. It was already down to 59 hertz. I'm sure if I doubled that, it would be below 58 and dropping. So just bent the tab that the spring's attached to, and I think it was around 61, maybe 61.5 hertz by the time I was done. So, you know, obviously we made out pretty well. Makes power, starts, sounds good. Now, I do need to chase a few things to make this thing more or less perfect. I think first thing is I want to see if I can get that cleaned up. Probably not. So I'll see if I can get a new one of those. Also, you know, the battery. We're going to need a new terminal, probably 2 new terminals, a new strap, and yeah, maybe some miscellaneous hardware. You know, missing a bolt right there. But overall, not too bad. So let me do a little research and see if parts are available for this generator. So I managed to get the plate off, but this lens is not cleaning up, and it probably won't matter anyway. I mean, there's signs of rust, water intrusion, and I think this meter is done. So I did look online for a parts diagram, can't find it, never mind parts. So I'm gonna pop this meter out and just see what I have to work with. I'm sure I can get some sort of generic meter to put in its place. Also, the oil filter's been ordered, and over here, you know, I do have an extra cable that I can use. You can see the gauge actually is a bit thicker than the one that's on here, so it's probably overkill, but that's fine. And then as far as the strap goes, I have this tie-down strap. That'll work just fine. So I'm gonna get the battery disconnected, replace the strap, replace the ground wire, wait for that filter, and get the gauge out. Okay, good. Okay, so the ground wire is currently connected here to this engine mount. It's actually pretty difficult to get to that screw to get it off cleanly. So I'm just gonna snip it here. And the new grounding wire is quite a bit longer, so I'm gonna run it right there, you know, down into the box. Okay, good, plenty of length. So we're pretty much all set there with the battery. I'm gonna leave it disconnected because this hot wire runs right over into this panel, which I wanna take off, at least the bolts holding that panel on. I've already loosened them up, and see if I can't get that meter out of there. So I just removed the 4 bolts, one in each corner. And doing that freed up this back panel. But I don't have a whole lot of access, maybe about an inch. And you can kind of see down there, that's the back of the meter. There's 2 screws on the left and 2 on the right. And once those are removed, you know, this should be free to pull forward a bit. Anyway, it's gonna be impossible to show you anything. I barely have enough room to get a tool in there, never mind a camera. So I'm gonna pause it here, turn you back on in a second. Okay, so it took a bit of doing, but we got it out. And I did end up removing the side panel just to give, you know, better access in here. Anyway, it's done, it's out. And I traced these wires, they actually go down here. I was trying to see if this was gonna show 120 volts or 240, and it's actually hooked up to both of the hot legs. So I do need a meter that can show 240 volts, which this one could. So I went online, I did find a few that matched, but they were pretty much all shipping from China, and delivery was anywhere from 2 to 3 months. So I'm in no rush to do that. I did find one US seller that had a 300 volt AC meter that dimensionally is about the same, but he didn't list the dimensions of the studs. So I went ahead and ordered that. It was only $7. It'll be here in a few days. Figured that would be worth a try. And worst case, I can always, you know, re-drill if I have to. But anyway, that's on its way, so I'll turn you back on in a second. Well, believe it or not, it's actually been about 7 weeks since the last clip. And this is the meter I ordered domestically that I knew the outer dimensions seemed like it would work, but wasn't sure about the stuff going on back here. And, you know, as you can see, it's a good size. It fits in there well, but these bolts, although they are the same width, don't line up. And that's because these bolts are about 1/3 of an inch higher than they were on the old meter. The old one, they were right down here at the bottom. So that kind of creates an issue here because as you go up about 1/3 of an inch, you run out of material to attach this to. And the other issue is the top has no bolts. It's supposed to be inserted and then slid up kind of into this channel to lock it in place. And that kind of presents the next problem. We got this awkward gap here. So yeah, not a big deal. Had enough to work on without doing anything on this. So just getting back to this now, I did get the one finally from China, and it's the same exact design and fits perfectly. So I'm gonna connect the wires and then just secure this on. Okay, took a bit of doing, but got all the bolts on and tightened up. So I think we're good. And yes, I am sponsored by Super Clean. So they sent me a bunch of stuff. I'm gonna try it out. This is my first attempt. And this here is the aerosol foam degreaser. So there was a bunch of oil buildup kind of around the oil filter, oil sensor, and on the block. And you can see the foam is actually not white anymore. It's taking that grease right off. So I'm just gonna get a rag, clean that up, and see how it did. Yeah, stuff definitely works. It just melted that oily mess off and it wiped right off. Okay, ready to give this thing another try. And I think most importantly, I want to see that that meter works. So once it's started, we'll check that out. Gonna let it warm up a bit. Then I'm gonna put this thing through its paces. It can do 7,500 continuous watts, so I'm gonna apply a 6,000 watt load. We'll probably start with half that, and once the engine warms up a bit more, I'll throw the full 6,000 on. Now, I've got a breakout cord here. The two outlets on the left are 30 amps, and the two on the right is 30 amps. So we have a total of 60 amps. We're only gonna need about 50 of that. So let's get this thing started, check out that meter, and then load it up. Okay, well, this engine did a very good job holding a 6,000 watt load. You know, we started at around 60.5 hertz and then loaded up to 6,000 watts. It only dropped to like 59 hertz. So that's excellent as far as the engine goes. And I was glad to see that meter is doing what it should. Now, the voltage is another issue. Unloaded, the voltage is a bit low. It's 116 volts. For something like this, it doesn't have an AVR. I'd expect closer to 127 volts. So we're a bit low, and then loaded up, the problem just gets worse. We get about a 10 volt drop to about 107 volts. And yeah, that's a bit low. I mean, 113 volts is kind of the low side of okay. 107, not great. So I'm gonna restart the engine. I wanna bump the speed up closer to 62 hertz and hopefully get that voltage up as well. Yeah, I'd like to see it closer to 125 volts unloaded, and then loaded up, it should be around 115. Yeah, not sure what happened there. The engine just stalled. So most likely the carb needs to be cleaned. I'm gonna try to start it again, see if it'll stay stable enough so that I can adjust the engine speed. Okay, it's both good and bad. I mean, the engine is running strong, holds the load fine. The voltage did come up to 120 volts unloaded when I changed the engine speed to 62 hertz. And fully loaded up, again, the engine's doing very well. It's holding almost at 60 hertz, but that voltage is low. 108 volts, I'd like to see it a little bit higher. Now, I don't know if there is an adjustment on this generator head, so I'm gonna have to look into that a bit more. Also, the engine is having some, I think, fuel-related issues. It was hard to start initially. It was surging, and after I took the load off, it stalled. And that happened the first time and the second time I tested loading it up. So I think we do have a fuel problem. I'm sure there's some junk in that carb, but who knows? It could be the fuel pump, the fuel filter, or potentially even spark. So I'm gonna grab the spark tester and just throw it on there and see if I can't reproduce it. I wanna make sure that I'm focusing in on the right thing here. Just gonna restart the engine and see what's going on here with the spark. Yeah, spark is not the issue. My money would be on the carb. It usually is, so guess I'll bring this back inside, change the oil while it's hot, and get that carb off. I usually like to drain the oil, but in this case, I think I'm gonna pump it out. You know, I don't wanna get oil all over the stator. Yeah, this one's pretty unavoidable. It's gonna make a mess. Nope. You can actually get the main jet out on this carb just by removing this drain bolt, but it's also pretty easy to get the bowl off. This just kind of snaps on and holds it in place, and almost everything that would clog up is down here. So I'm most interested to take a look at the bowl, see the needle and float function, and also I want to see how full this bowl is. Is it starving because there's not enough fuel in the bowl, or is there just some debris kind of getting in the way of the fuel inlet? So this did run out of fuel. I mean, there's a little bit in there right now, but it's not enough to even make the float. It's right at the bottom, so the needle should be wide open. When I removed the fuel line too, there was plenty of fuel that spilled out. It's not like the line was empty. So I know the fuel pump's working. I know the lines aren't clogged. The filter's not clogged. something, between here and here isn't letting the fuel in. So I'm going to pop this needle and float out and get a better look at what's going on. There's a bit of gunk on that seat, but overall not too bad. So I'm going to hook up a fuel line, just blow some air, and just see if it's restricted. Cleaned up the seat a bit, but can't find any obstructions here, so I don't think that's the issue. But since it's apart, I'm going to clean out this jet here as well as the main jet. So I just blew through this with compressed air. There's no obstructions, and I cleaned up the seat a bit. I don't think the issue is there. Now, a little bit more concerning is while I was blowing it out, this flew out, and it's all deformed. It's not supposed to have a hole that small. So I guess that's the first issue. The second one is there should be two of these O-rings. One of them is between the main jet and the body, and I haven't removed the main jet. The other O-ring is right here, I think, but it's also deformed. So I don't know where that one came from. Potentially I somehow blew it out of the main jet area, not sure. Regardless, I gotta get that main jet out. It's kind of stuck. That spring has been expanded and it's getting hung up on the thread. So I'm gonna work at that a little bit more, see if I can't get the main jet out and see if that O-ring is missing. Gonna need a new spring. It was pretty egged out. There was no way it was gonna come out in one piece. So I guess this is the gasket that was in there. How it came out, not sure, but needs to be replaced anyway. So I'm gonna replace this and get a new spring. I reinstalled the float with the needle. Just gonna test the function. I'm gonna blow in the line and basically test the two different positions. When it's up like this, there should be no air going through, and down like that, the needle's open and air should pass through without restriction. So I think you can see there is an issue with the needle and seat. That's why we're running out of fuel. Most likely that seat is swollen and has to be replaced. And similar to this O-ring, I mean, this here should look like that. Luckily I have O-rings, but I do not have any extra seats nor an extra spring. So place an order for those two items and continue on. Aha. The stator and rotor look to be in very good condition. And this is what I was thinking I might see. This is a huge capacitor. And that's what you have on brushless setups. And when you start seeing low voltage, there's a good chance that it's that. So I'm going to get that capacitor out and test it. First things first, make sure it's discharged. And it is. This capacitor is rated at 35 UF, which is microfarad, plus or minus 5%. Anywhere between, I guess, 37 and 33 would be within spec. I've got the multimeter set up to measure capacitance. Let's see what this thing's at. It's right around 31 microfarad. That's out of tolerance. It's a bit low. It's about 10% less than its rated capacity. And that's roughly the amount of voltage we're off, about 10%. So I'd say we need a new capacitor. I got all the bits and pieces I need. Got a new spring and a new needle and seat. Also paid a visit to several HVAC shops and kind of struck out. They had 35 microfarad capacitors, but the size was completely wrong. It would not have fit. I ended up going to an electric motor shop, and it was actually established in 1910. It was a very old building, pretty cool inside, and it kind of looked like time had frozen in there. It was kind of neat. But they had plenty of capacitors. And I settled on this one, which was a 35 microfarad capacitor. It does up to 440 volts. At least that's its rated voltage. And this one was rated at 420, and this is actually faded off, but I think it said 470. And around here, 440 is pretty much the highest that I'm going to find. So hopefully this will be good enough. So I'm just going to proceed, get this carb fixed up, throw it back on, and then we'll also put that capacitor in. There are several ways to get this seat out. You could actually blow compressed air in and potentially launch it out of there. I think the preferred tool is like a dental pick, which I don't have. Well, technically I do have, but I don't think my wife would appreciate it if I used it. So another way to do it is with a wood screw. And you want to be careful not to dig into the carb itself. But what you want to do is just thread it down the middle of the seat and then hopefully pull it out. Kind of like that. Gotta hold off putting the needle and float in I want to get the main jet in that O-ring while it's kind of visible what's going on. So this is going to be the tricky part. Hopefully this O-ring stays in place. All right, I'm just going to blow air through it again. Hopefully it works. Yeah, that's the way it should work. I probably should have double checked this before installing the capacitor, but it's a good idea to double check the capacitance. This should be 35 microfarad, and they're never exact, but you want it to be in the ballpark. Yeah, we're at 34.7. So that's a pretty big difference from where we were at before. That's within tolerance. Ready to give this thing another try. Last time I ran it, I did bump the engine speed up to about 62 hertz in an effort to get the voltage up. And that only brought it up to 120 volts unloaded and about 108 volts loaded up to 6,000 watts. So I'm expecting now that the voltage will be closer to 130 volts under no load, and then hopefully stay above, ideally 113 volts, if not better, when loaded up. So let's give this thing a try. Better, almost 126 volts, 62 and about a half hertz. Okay, not too bad. I did have to choke it a bit longer than normal, but it's a cool day out. And after about a minute, I was able to shut it off, no issues. And the capacitor definitely made a difference. The voltage is up now. It's about 5 volts higher than it was, both unloaded and loaded. So that brings us back into kind of a normal operating voltage. This does not have an AVR, so it is going to be on the high side when unloaded, and we were at 125 volts now, and when loaded up it dropped to 113, which is low, but it's on the low side of passable, and that's what I'd expect given the generator head that's on there. Plus, you know, the engine speed sags a bit. It dropped by about 120 RPM or about 2 hertz, so that's also going to impact the voltage, not just the capacitor. Anyway, this one took a bit longer. I think when I started working on it, it was a nice summer day. You know, now it's, well, not summer anymore. All the leaves are gone, but I'm glad I spent the time to get this thing fixed right. It's now doing everything the way that it should. So I hope this video helps someone. Thanks for watching.